Welcome back. All right, so I'm going to do a video today on my hatred of Dallas. What's that? No, I don't hate Dallas. So all of the talk that I see about how Dallas is playing right now and a lot of, that THG really hates Dallas. I don't know why he's always so hard on Dallas. The real reality is I'm not. The reality is I haven't been. So when you look at the power rankings over the season, I've gone through and checked the numbers. They've been top 5 twice this season in the power rankings. They've been top 10 16 weeks. There's been 5 weeks where they're outside of the top 10 in the National Hockey League, and currently they are 10th on the power rankings board. Now, I know some of this is that people watch their team and they don't watch the other teams, and so they're like, my team's playing really well, and then Saturday rolls around, they watch power rankings and go, hey, my team's playing well. What's the problem? Or, yeah, my team had a hard week, but however, there's reasons, and then they watch power rankings and go, it's not fair. So I'm going to go through this week by week. So October 15th, they were 10th on the power rankings. That week, they won 2 games, both against Nashville. So it didn't tell us a whole lot, right? At Nashville, at home against Nashville, they won the games by a combined score of 9-2. October 22nd, they had moved up to 6th. They won at Winnipeg that week. They lost against Toronto in overtime, and then they won at Montreal. So very solid record for them to that point, 4-0-1. They were 6th on the power rankings. They dropped to 7th a week later. Why? Well, they lost at Ottawa. They lost at Boston. They won at home against Washington. And then they lost versus the New York Rangers 6-3. So again, this is one of those, the Boston game wouldn't have hurt them. The Rangers game wouldn't necessarily have hurt them either. Rangers were really high in the power rankings at that point. Ottawa, yes. Washington, they won, so they dropped the 1 spot, right? So it's overall, it's a week where they lose 3 out of 4, but I didn't drop them that much. So the idea that, he's just too hard on them kind of gets knocked out by that week. The following week, they were undefeated. They won at home against LA, at Arizona, and at Edmonton, 5-2, 7-2, and 6-2, and they moved up to 4th on the power rankings. That's as high as they've been this year, is 4th. So that was November 5th. Then November 12th, they dropped to 8th because they lost both games that week. At Winnipeg, 5-1, and then at home against San Jose, 5-4. They stayed 8th the following week. They won at Philadelphia 5-1. They had an overtime loss at Tampa Bay 5-4. They win at Florida 6-4, and then they won at home against the Islanders 5-2. So they don't lose anything in regulation, but the win against Philadelphia wouldn't have bumped them up for that. An overtime loss at Tampa's fine. Florida got off to a tough time of it. And so again, you're looking at teams here where I'm like, yeah, 8th is the right spot. And that's sometimes what happens where a team wins. And I look at the rankings board, and there's one thing that people overlook at times, which is if a team that's sitting at 8th on the board wins a game, they don't necessarily get to move up to 7th because they won that game. Because the team that's 7th on the board, if they didn't play that night, may not deserve to drop down to 8th because the other team behind them won. And that's something that I've learned over the years. In the beginning, when I started doing the power rankings, it didn't matter. None of it mattered. If you win, you move up. If you lose, you move down. And over the years, I found that just creates a board that's complete and total chaos. And in the case of Dallas, it would be complete and total chaos. So November 26th, they dropped to 10th. Why? Well, they had the shootout loss at home against Colorado. They win 6-4 versus Chicago. Sloppy game there. Overtime loss 5-4 against Winnipeg. And then they lost 4-1 against Colorado. So this is where there's some sloppy hockey getting in there, right? December 3rd, they're right back up to 5th. They won both games that week. 4-1 at St. Louis and 5-0 against Anaheim. And again, moving up 5 spots indicates there are other teams that were doing more poorly than they were. And that's the thing too, is that you can see a team move up on a power rankings because other teams are playing worse, and vice versa, where that teams can all be playing better, and they're all in a pack, and that pack stays together. December 10th, they dropped a couple of spots. They had a shootout loss at home against Minnesota, 6-5. They lost 4-0 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. They won in overtime against Ottawa 4-3. So 1 asterisk means overtime win, 2 asterisks means shootout win. Then they won in overtime against Detroit by a score of 3-2. So they needed overtime to beat Detroit and Ottawa, both teams below the playoff line. They lost against Minnesota in a shootout, so that's treated like a tie, and they lost 4-0 at home against Toronto. So not a great week for them. They dropped to 9th the following week. They lost at Pittsburgh 2-1. They beat New Jersey by a score of 4-1. They beat Washington in Washington 2-1, and they had an overtime loss 5-4 at Carolina. So they dropped to 9th. And that looks kind of mean, right? But again, other teams around them are going to affect their standing. So it's a matter of, I felt other teams were playing better at that point. There's that judgment call that gets made. They stay ninth on December 24th. So they won at Columbus 2-1. They lost 6-3 at home against Edmonton, and they won 4-2 against Montreal. Well, Columbus and Montreal both at the bottom of the league, or near the bottom of the league, and they lost against Edmonton, but I kept them in the same spot. December 31st, they're back up to 6th place. They won at Nashville 3-2. They won at Minnesota 4-1, and they beat San Jose 5-2. So again, good week, 3 straight wins. They move up 3 spots. January 7th, they're back down to 10th. They lost at Anaheim 3-2, and they lost at Anaheim 2-0. So both losses in California, that's tough, right? And so they end up dropping down to 10th, especially that shootout loss against Anaheim. You can't have that, right? Then they dropped to 12th the following week. They had a 5-1 win against Florida at home. Then they went in a shootout against the New York Islanders in New York. So again, I treat that like a tie. They had an overtime loss at the New York Rangers, and then they lost 6-5 against Calgary. So sloppy loss against Calgary, just not a great overall week for them, and they dropped down to 12th. They moved back up to 8th the following week. They won 4-0 at Vegas. Solid game there. Then they lose 5-3 against San Jose. They win 4-0 at LA, and they won 4-0 against Arizona. So they get 3 shutouts that week, and what kept them from moving up further was that 5-3 loss against San Jose, right? Because remember, I update these every day, so they would have moved up for that win at Vegas. They would have moved a little bit down probably for that San Jose one and the LA and Arizona games. The LA game, it would have rewarded them. Arizona, not as much, because Arizona keeping them off the board, considering their overall record, not as impressive as what other teams may have been doing that same night. So January 28th, they're down to 10th. They had the 3-2 overtime loss against Buffalo, the 3-2 overtime loss against Carolina, the 3-2 overtime loss against New Jersey. When they won their most recent overtime game, there were some Dallas fans that were kind of mad that I said I was really surprised they won because of this. They have 13 overtime and shootout loss points. They are tied for the lead in the league with Calgary at that number. And it's a problem. Now, I've seen people say, well, overtime 3-on-3 is not real hockey. It is now. It wasn't. When it started out, it was this great back and forth and no structure. Now, it's very structured. It's very much about come back, set up, look for your spot, get in the other zone. If it's not open, back up, get back out. It is very much a chess match. So I do consider that to be hockey. And if you lose in overtime, while I don't consider it to be as egregious as losing in regulation, same as if you win in overtime, I don't consider that to be as impressive as winning in regulation. They add up. Then the following week, they move up to 8th. They had the shootout win against Anaheim 3-2. They had a 4-1 win at home against Minnesota, and then they lost 3-1 against Tampa. So again, not penalizing them for a loss against Tampa. Pretty solid team overall that has now dropped down in the rankings. They're currently 13th as I'm looking at the board right now. February 18th, they were 12th on the board. They had the overtime loss against Boston, the shootout loss at Minnesota, and then they lost 4-1 at home against Columbus. So this is the thing. They only lost 1 in regulation, but they didn't win a game that week. And this is where your team is not very likely to move up when they don't win a game. Then the following week, they're down to 17th. They lost against Chicago 4-3. This is after a loss against Columbus. So these are 2 losses against 2 of the absolute worst teams in the National Hockey League, followed by a 3-2 shootout victory at Vegas. So again, they end up 17th because I felt like, Dallas is not playing well. They're playing down to really poor opponents. And then the following week, they move up to 14th. So now we're into March. We're into this month. They had the overtime loss 5-4 against Vancouver, because that's what happens in overtimes. They won 4-2 at home against Arizona. They won at Chicago 5-2. And then there was the 7-3 win against Colorado. Now, the Arizona and Chicago wins, I even said at the time, was going to give this impression that they were playing really, really well and everything was just absolutely great. And then the win against Colorado meant that's 3 wins in a row. Look, we're on a streak. Everything's great. But again, Arizona and Chicago after the deadline, the teams have been gutted. You should beat those teams if you're going to be a playoff team, right? So they moved up to 14th. I did move them up, but not nearly as much as people wanted. After that 7-3 win against Colorado, we are now a top 10 team. And that's not really how that works. Because again, there are 31 other teams in the league. And if I played it that way where a team has a really good game, so they get busted up 3 or 4 spots that night, those rankings are going to be absolute chaos. Absolute, complete, and total chaos. So this past week, they were 13th. They had the loss 5-4 against Calgary, where they lost with 5 seconds left. That was a tough one. They had a 10-4 win at Buffalo. Buffalo's terrible at home. This is why I'm glad I watch as many games as I do and as many teams as I do. That was a complete and total meltdown by the Buffalo Sabres. That was one of the worst games I've seen Buffalo play, maybe ever. That was absolutely awful. And then they had the 4-3 overtime win at Seattle, so they moved up one spot. Just the one spot. This week, they have the 5-2 win at Seattle, and after last night's game, teams have moved around enough. Right now, Dallas is 10th on the board. So for Dallas, they currently sit in the top 10. So I wanted to make a video on this because I know that there are criticisms that I'm too hard on Dallas. Let me just take a look at their upcoming schedule here. So they're at Vancouver tonight, right? And I'll be watching that one. That one will be interesting because Vancouver's been playing much better lately. Then they're at Edmonton and they're at Calgary, and that's for the end of the week. So there will be three more games to decide whether they stay in the top 10 or not. And if they lose at Vancouver, they lose at Edmonton, they lose in Calgary, odds of being in the top 10, very, very low. But again, there's a lot of blue on this board. The blue are the losses, the green are the wins, and you can see there's a lot of blue right from about the January 21st power rankings down to a couple weeks ago. We were seeing a lot of blue on the board because they were losing. And one of the things that does make me concerned with the overtime losses is that it's just you're looking for that big key goal in a really close game, and that has been elusive to them this year. That big key goal when it's a really close game. Do they win laughers? Yes, 7-3, 10-4. I'd even say last night's 5-2 was never in doubt. But when it's a one-goal game, that's what we're looking at in the playoffs. Playoffs, we're going to be looking at a lot of one-goal games. And Dallas needs to be able to win those ones a little more often than they have this year. But there you go. Quick explanation from me, as quick as I can make it, where I go through the entire schedule. And you notice I went from best to middle to ugliest. So for the logos, I went with my favorite to medium to this was the abomination that they've not done a reverse retro or throwback to, and I'm very disappointed in them for it. But anyways, there you go. And I'm wearing my Ottinger jersey because I'm a huge supporter of Jake Ottinger. I think the guy's amazing. And yeah, there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through, you just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.